Hello, all you lovely people, and welcome to my deck tech on Arixmethes, the Slumbering Isle. Now, this card is very special to me because it's what got me into Commander, alright? So, let's get right into the Commander, shall we? Arixmethes, the Slumbering Isle costs two colorless, a green, and a blue. It's a legendary Kraken, and it reads: when Arixmethes enters the battlefield, it enters the battlefield tapped with 5 slumber counters on it. Now, let's talk about that for a little bit. While it has a slumber counter on it, it's still a land, which means you could keep counters on it as protection because it's a land, but then again, you could risk the thing of it getting strip mined, which definitely wouldn't be fun, especially for as long as it takes this commander to get started. But once again, that protection is a double-edged sword. There's not a lot of land destruction out there, nor do players want to play land destruction because, in Magic that's just rude. The word may in this case allows you to keep counters on it if you do cast a spell, just in case you want that extra protection of being said land. And on top of all of that, it can add green and blue. Of course, not when it enters the battlefield, because it enters the battlefield tapped, of course. Let's get on to our first tactic, Bedrock. Bedrock is just explaining the basic mana rocks in the deck. That's all this category is about. And then we have the generic version of Prismatic Lens, and it says you can add one colorlet, pay a one, tap it. To filter your mana Soul Ring, pay one, add two colorless. And Simic Signet says pay one and add green blue to your mana pool. You see, if you get to Soul Ring and Simic Signet turn one, the Soul Ring pretty much ramps into the Simic Signet immediately, turn two, and you can tap a Soul Ring and still have one colorless floating and have green blue, so a total of 3 mana, which is pretty awesome early game. And with all that said, it's time to move on to our next category, which is Start to Flourish. This category is going to be about our ramp pieces and all of our ramp pieces. So we have the green staples like Rampant Growth, Farseek, and Nature's Lore. Let's leave Traverse the Outlands out for a second and talk about the first 3 cards. They all cost 1 and a green. Rampant Growth and Farseek are mainly used for getting a forest or basic land, but Nature's Lore has the benefit of the land not being tapped as it enters the battlefield. Now, Traverse the Outlands is one of those mid-game cards to where if you have Arixmethes as a creature, you can get 12 basics into play tapped. So on your next turn, that ramp is essential and gonna set up some combos if you hit the right cards, which you probably are because you're getting rid of 12 basic cards and putting them on the battlefield, which filters your deck so you can get better creatures and better spells that you can cast instead of just hitting land drops over and over and over again. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next strategy. Tap Shenanigans. This is, of course, literally Tap Shenanigans, which is pretty much creatures that can tap that have synergy with the deck or the commander. So let's talk about cards like Beast Caller Savant. It has haste and it can tap and add 1 mana to your mana pool to cast a creature spell. Which in this case is not really going to matter because the main spell type in the deck is creatures. Voyaging Satyr says you can untap target land, which is great for untapping your commander to get the extra 2 mana from it. But if it's a creature, you can't use that ability anymore. So that's why I think Kiora's Follower is a bit better because it says untap target permanent, which means regardless whether the creature is a creature or a land, it can still be untapped by Kiora's Follower. If it only has Seaborn Muse, it can just untap all permanents, which is great for blocking or getting things into play with we have Flash, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Let's keep just swimming along to our next category, which is Infinite Mana. Infinite mana, you say? Yes, I literally mean infinite mana. Let's go on. Freed from the Rill and Penum's Aura. Each cost 3. And they say enchant creature. The key fact for each of these cards is it says pay a blue, untap enchanted creature. Well, when you attack Arixmethes for mana, you get blue and green. what you do is you use that blue from tapping Arixmethes for the enchantment cost to untap it, meaning both of these cards will give you infinite green mana as long as the Arixmethes is a creature. Like I said, it has to be a creature, which is up to you whether you want to keep him a creature or a land. But their deck synergizes a lot more if he's a creature, and Penum's Aura just has a little bit more utility on it. And keeping with the subject of mana, we got lands worth talking about. And what I mean by this category is we're not going to talk about lands that just tap for mana. We're going to tap about lands that have abilities that synergize with the deck. So, like, for example, Mosswort Bridge. It has Hideaway. When it comes into play tap, I can look at the top 4 library, remove one of them face down, put the rest on the bottom of the library. And then you can pay a green and tap it and play the removed card without paying its mana cost if your total power 10 or greater. Right? So if once Arixmethes is a creature, his power is 12, so you don't have to worry about that. So the whole point of this is to cheat in a creature, or hope you can cheat in a creature or spell. Even still, it has great utility. Next, we have Thespian Stage, which is one of the few synergies that Arixmethes has while it's still in. You can pay to tap it, and Thespian Stage becomes a copy of target land, which means you can turn Thespian Stage into Arixmethes, which gives you an extra 2 mana for 1, and for 2, since it's a land, it doesn't have to enter with the counters on it, so it can go ahead and tap, and it can even be a creature if you really need it to be a creature. And then Rogue's Passage just makes it easier for your creatures to get through new combat damage. And speaking of creatures, wow, it's like this thing is scripted. Time for the perfect segue. The Creature MVP. This is the section that I'm going to start for every deck, which is going to be the most important creature to the deck. For this deck, it's going to be Kinnan Bonder Prodigy. Not only does this card have great utility and cost cheap, but this is whenever you tap a non-land permanent for mana, add 1 mana of any type. So once Arixmethes becomes a creature, it can tap for an additional green or blue, which makes it from 2 mana to 3 mana. And like I said, if you have Thespian Stage, that will also affect it. Even though it's still technically land, it's also technically a creature. I'm actually not sure about that now that I think about it. But sequencing issues and all that aside, it's also a tutor. You can pay 7, look at the top 5 cards of your library, remove a non-human, which is basically every creature in this deck, and put it onto the battlefield in the library in a random order. So yeah, it's a tutor. This card is the best. This creature card is just perfect for this deck. Heck, if it wasn't just a utility creature, it'd probably be a commander all by itself, like a Xuri and everything else. And let's move on. Tidal Wave. Let me talk about this for a second. This strategy is one of the main core strategies of the deck. Tidal Wave represents the amazing amounts and varieties of ways that we can cheat high CMC creatures into play for half or just reduce the cost of those spells CMC like crazy so they can get into the battlefield and do damage and stay on the battlefield since they have such high power. They're sort of resistant to burn spells, but of course, instantly destroy spells like murder and board wipes. Yeah, our board is still a bit weak to those, but we got ways of recovering from those. On the ways of recovering spells, we've got Goreclaw, Terraclaw, Seisma. It's a legendary bear, and it says creatures with power 4 or greater cost 2 colorless less to cast. And once again, most of our creatures are power... Sorry, I had a stroke. Most of the creatures in our deck have a power of 4 or greater anyways, and whenever it attacks, they get stronger every single time it attacks, and they gain trample. Thrix is Strix is a card. I just get appalled every time I talk about it because it's so overpowered. It has flash, it's a flyer, so it can hit for 4 damage in the air, which is usually difficult to deal with unless the opponent has blockers. But it says spells with converted mana cost 5 or greater, once again, almost our entire deck, cost 1 less to cast and cannot be countered. Which means blue decks are not going to be having a fun time. So, like I said, this card, Thrix, he was very, very close to being the creature MVP just because things can't be countered. Because it just ups your defense insanely high. And I mean insanely high. And then we got Fierce Empath. It's just a 1/1 tutor for 3. It's not that important. Now, this card. Oh my god, this card. Once again, this card was at high consideration for the creature MVP because it has Cascade. Now, before you think of it, I made this mistake playing a personal game of mine, and I thought every time you cast this spell with converted mana cost 6 or greater with this ability, that the Cascade stack resets. No, even if you hit a creature with power 6 or greater, and then you hit another one with mana cost higher than that card, you still have to exile it and keep on going through till you find something smaller. And this card is insane for its utility and for the amount of creatures it could cheat into play as long as you have a downward slope. It's just insane and overpowered in my opinion. Another card that can be a commander just by itself. Legendary utility. Now, this is all about legendary creatures or artifacts that give the deck utility, whether it's card draw or anything that is helpful mid to late game. First up, we got AC Gyre Strait and Tatiova Bethnic Druid. Both of these have great synergy with each other, but both of them give us land advantage. AC allows us to play 2 lands, and whenever we do play a land, and we draw a card. Tatiova does basically the same thing, but we get 1 life. So with Tatiova, we get an extra life, but with AC, we get to play another land. So if these two are on the battlefield at the same time, you're going to have a lot, and I mean a lot of value. And now we have the Thassa set. Thassa is an indestructible god that costs 2 and a blue, and it says, as long as your devotion to blue is less than 5 Thassas in a creature. Here's the main part. At the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1, card advantage. And then it says target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. That is for Arixmethes. Since Arixmethes is already a 12/12, it's a 2-shot commander damage kill. Bident of Thassa says whenever a creature you control deals combat to a player, you may draw a card. And it also has the same ability of making creatures unblockable, which, like I said, combat damage is insane for this deck, especially for your commander, because, once again, it's a 2-shot freaking kill. Nezahal the Primal Titan, Prime Speakers, and Agata. Nezahal is just like Strix. It may not have flash, but it can't be countered. It gets rid of our maximum hand size, and it's just an infinite card draw engine. And if it were to somehow die, we can discard 3 cards from our hand and return it tapped at the beginning of the next end step. So it's like Kefnet in a way, even though it's not the 3rd card in the library, it still is able to come back. Prime Speaker Zenigaya, Gaga, whatever you want to call it, enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters, where X is the greatest power among creatures control. Once again, if Arixmethes is a creature, it becomes a 13/13, and we draw 13 cards because of Arixmethes' power. That's insane. Beneath the Depths. This is just going to be our basic beater creatures. I'm not going to go through them all really intensely. I'm just going to skim over them unless one of the cards piques my interest enough to talk about it. They all, of course, have great abilities. Aegis Will, Ancient Breathing Leviathan, Elder Deep Fiend. All of them do some sort of tap, and then Aegis Will Ancient is a sorcery wipe, or lack for better terms, a sorcery speed rift, which isn't the best, but also it isn't the worst. And then Breaching Leviathan just taps down creatures so we can get combat damage through easier. Inkwell Leviathan, Isleback Spawn, Kedrick Leviathan. All of these are just beat sticks or have some sort of protection or buffing themselves or recursion. Kraken the Streets, Lorthos the Tidemaker, and Pearl Lake Ancient. Once again, just beat sticks, nothing really special except for Pearl Lake Ancient has Flash, and it could be replayed as long as you return 3 lands, which, let me talk about that for a second, because if Arixmethes is a land and someone wants to do some sort of land hate shenanigans and destroy your commander while it's still land, if you somehow have Pearl Lake Ancient on the battlefield, you can use its ability to save it and your commander by bouncing them to your hand. Nimbus Swimmer and Simic Sky Swallower, once again, just have good evasion and or utility, or just a beat stick. Scrapdiver Servant, unblockable as long as the opponent has an artifact. And then Stripbreaker Kraken and Storm Surge Kraken both have ways of buffing themselves. Storm Surge Kraken discourages blocks because if it is blocked, you get to draw 2 cards, which is pretty good. I mean, card draw in this deck is pretty good, but it's also very crucial. Stormtide Leviathan, all additions to their islands. An island walk, creatures without flying or island walk can attack. So this can be used just to block out an entire board from attacking you. And then Tidal Kraken is one of the ancient cards, but it's just a 6/6 for 8, and it's just taking up space as a beat stick. Here we go again. This is about our few copy spells that are just a little extra spicy meat the bug to get the deck a little bit more stronger. And we have Progenitor Mimic and Rite of Replication. What's unfortunate about these cards is they're great cards, don't get me wrong, but most of the creatures in the deck are legendary, so the only way you'd be able to use these effectively is if you I had a stroke, target a non-legendary creature, which an extra beat stick or 2 is pretty good. Protection and buffs, these are things that synergize with the deck as a whole or the creatures with a whole. Heroic Intervention, it's just straight up protection. Spearbreaker Behemoth can give indestructible to almost our entire deck. Overwhelming Stampede is just an XX buffer, which is pretty much a 12/12 with our commander. Same thing with the Dragon Throne of Tarkir, but to where that is repeatable and gives them trample. So once again, you want to put Dragon Throne of Tarkir on Arixmethes, so you could just use its ability to pay 2, or if you have infinite mana, not even tap it at all and pay 2, and each creature gets +X/+X till end of turn. So that can make a huge difference. If our entire board immediately comes a threat of at least 12 power during combat, oh boy, your opponents will be crying unless they have some sort of combat trick to get rid of such an effect. Archetype of Imagination. This card gives all of our creatures flying and disables opponents' creatures for having flying. So it's just more evasion for our commander. Reclamation Sage is just enchantment or artifact removal. Say there's something that's annoying your deck or annoying your creature, something shutting down your deck maybe. And then Broken Bond is just the exact same thing for 1 less, and you get to add a land from your hand onto the battlefield. Where if you bounce your commander, you could use that ability to put your commander into play, since it's technically still land. Unwind and Rewind are just 2 counter spells that do the same thing, just Unwind taps 1 less than Rewind. Once again, if your commander is a land, he can be targeted with this ability, so you can get insane value off of these counter spells, but there's only 2 of them in the deck. Let's move on. Keep the currents going. This strategy is just going over all of our draw spells that we have. So things at Blue Sun Zenith, which is target player draws X cards, shuffle Blue Zenith into its owner's library. So this ensures us to never mill out as long as we played it during the game, because it always bounces back to our graveyard, bounces back to our library. So there's no chance of us milling it, because if we play it, we can just recycle it to the bottom of our deck and it'll keep us alive. Stroke of Genius costs X2 and a blue, and it says draw X cards. I think you know how that works. In Rush of Knowledge, draw cards equal to the highest converted mana cost amongst permanents are control. I believe the highest in this deck is 11 mana, so we'd be drawing at most 11 cards with this card. Shamanic Revelation says draw a card for each creature you control. So this is meant as sort of a game ender, or if you're running really low on cards, or you're really desperate, you can just play this card, refill your health, and just have more gas. This card's expertise. This is, will be drawing us 12 cards as long as we have Arixmethes out, and then we can cheat in a creature with converted mana cost 5 or less from our hand, which is pretty good. And an Elemental Bond set is just whenever a creature enters the battlefield power 3 or greater, basically our entire deck, we draw a card. So every time we play a creature out of our deck, pretty much we get to draw a card off of that. Let's move on. Wow, this strategy is so complicated. Board wipes. Yeah, it's just board wipes. Cyclonic Rift, you can't have a commander deck without it. And then you have Whelming Wave, which is a sorcery rift. Well, I like to call it a sorcery tribal rift because it keeps Krakens, Leviathans, and Octopus and Serpents on our battlefield, which technically it could be considered a one-sided board wipe, but also there's creatures like Naga and Human that will still be bounced to our hands. And then Slim Voda is kicker. When it's kicked, it does the same thing as Whelming Wave, so it's still a pseudo one-sided board wipe, but it's also an 8/8 creature for combat purposes if you need it for that. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thanks for supporting my very first video, my very first deck tech. Subscribe if you want to see more. If you want to see more, I might want to start a series where I take fans' deck lists and show them off to you guys, because I believe that YouTube should be a community as a whole, and this channel should be community led. Sure, I make the videos and I get the rewards, but I use those rewards to better myself and my recording devices and better content so we can get more subscribers. The same usual YouTube American dream, or international dream rather. Once again, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye, lovely people.